Okay. My name is Bill Davis. I'm one of the co-founders of the Christic Institute. I'm a Jesuit priest who has worked with the Institute now since its founding in 1980. And I have been involved in many of the investigations. I'm currently working on the West Coast as the West Coast Director and Coordinator of our 2 branch offices out there. Tripping is all?
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Well, I mean, is that too much noise?
No, that's fine.
No, that kind of thing is fine.
So
Sure.
what
All right. Well, I think that we are in a rather extraordinary time now when a number of movements are happening that are not getting into the press. One of them, of course, is the lack of any kind of appreciation of the real war on drugs. There are all kinds of things happening, revelations being made around the drug issue that are getting very little press. And the second one, it seems to me, that I'm very concerned about as a result of our lawsuit is the whole trend towards secrecy and using secrecy against the citizens, against the fundamental need for an enlightened you can't really have democracy without having a body of people who are enlightened by reality. And when we have secrecy being used now to curtail criminal trials, as they are in Iran-Contra, when we have a whole slide toward kind of fascism here, at the same time that Eastern Europe is moving very rapidly toward democracy, I find it very ironic that the winds of democracy are sweeping across Europe, but in the U.S., the trend seems almost to be in the opposite direction. And some of the things that I would point to, of course, to illustrate that would be the recent claims of national security that are being used, for instance, to curtail any kind of criminal prosecution. We've just had the phenomenon of, first of all, plea bargaining. People like Secord and Hakim each accepted one plea bargain and one guilty count and had all their other charges dismissed. The special prosecutor accepted that and did not go forward with a trial that may have revealed to the American public some of the things that they need to know around Iran-Contra. But worse yet, when it came to Joe Fernandez, the former CIA station chief from Costa Rica, he didn't have to plead guilty to anything. The defense, his lawyer, insisted that he would need certain documents in order to defend himself, documents which would show he was basically following orders. The executive branch, of course, refused to give over those documents, claiming that national security would be harmed. And that argument prevailed, so the trial was called off. Now, even the special prosecutor said that they were protecting false secrets, that the kinds of things that they were protecting, like the fact that the CIA station is located in the embassy in 2 or 3 countries in Central America. I mean, everybody knows that. We had a classic example of that during the North trial when the national security argument was used to prevent papers going to North, which in fact the Christic Institute had already revealed in open court. We had the Rob Owen memos, whole and entire, and had introduced them into open court. Reporters had written about them, so there wasn't any deep dark secret that's going to harm our national security. And yet the government was refusing to give them to North's defense attorney on the grounds that national security would be harmed. So I use this as simply illustrative of a trend that I think is very discouraging and is very ominous, in fact. It means that those of us who think we already have a democracy and don't have to worry about it are finding that we have less and less information upon which to base our judgments, and therefore we really don't have democracy. We're sliding away from democracy at the very time that Eastern Europe is pulling down the walls of secrecy and is moving forward toward a much more open society. So, but getting back to the question of the drugs, one of the people involved, I mentioned, for instance, that Joe Fernandez did not have to plead guilty to anything. His whole trial was dismissed on the grounds of national security. He's one of the men who has been named by the Costa Rican Congress as being persona non grata in Costa Rica precisely because he was consorting with those who were dealing drugs in that country. Now, the fact that he and 4 other major U.S. figures, including the former ambassador, Tams, former General Richard Secord, Albert Hakim, Oliver North. The fact that Oliver North and people like Joe Fernandez and the former ambassador were declared persona non grata in Costa Rica because of their consorting with the drug traffickers, that got almost no press in the United States. And I think it's outrageous. It shows a real lack of concern about one major front on the drug issue, and that is the foreign policy connection of drugs. There's been, it's not just the Christic Institute that's saying that through its lawsuit. We said that some 3.5 years ago when we filed our lawsuit. We now have verification from sources such as the Senate subcommittee under John Kerry, which was signed on to by various conservative Republicans like Alphonse D'Amato from New York. That subcommittee found and documented the fact that national security issues and State Department priorities always took precedent over the drug issue, and that not only did they look the other way, there was active consorting with drug dealers. Some of the funding for the Contras, for instance, came directly from the cartel. Other foreign policy objectives were put ahead of stopping the drug dealers. So when we purport to have a national war on drugs, and yet we have major findings about the foreign policy connection with drug dealing, and those connections are not even given proper scope in the press, I think we're in big trouble. I think that's a severe blow to democracy, and it makes me wonder if constitutional democracy is going to survive in this country.
What's comfortable for you?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, the Christic Institute filed some 3.5 years ago a civil lawsuit in federal court in Miami on behalf of 2 U.S. journalists who were injured by Contra activity. A rather massive lawsuit where we said not only were they injured, but that there is a criminal enterprise, a racketeering enterprise that involves such things as blowing up press conferences, but it also involves illegal arms traffic, some of it funded by illegal drug traffic, some of the profits being used to wage these secret wars, like helping the Contras, but it isn't limited simply to Central America. And we named the players. We named people like Secord and Hakim and Rob Owen and so on. They're all defendants of ours. We named them some 7 months before Iran-Contra ever broke. Now, ironically, our lawsuit has been issued a summary judgment order, which in non-legalese means the judge substituted his judgment for the judgment of a jury so that we couldn't have a trial. But we have his decision up on appeal and are confident that we're going to prevail on that. The judge is also saying that it was a frivolous lawsuit, but contrary to what he and others might say about it, 90% of what we alleged 3.5 years ago is now being confirmed by totally different sources. Iran-Contra hearings, for instance, the North trial, the most recent findings of the Senate subcommittee on foreign policy and drugs, the Kerry Committee, a number of government agencies such as the Costa Rican government has reopened their investigation of the Lopenka bombing. So many of the things that we alleged 3.5 years ago have proven to be true. We said that there was an enterprise. Secord and others now admit that there is. We said they were dealing arms illegally. Turns out they were, in even the most least likely spot of the world, the Ayatollah Khomeini's government. We further alleged that it had a direct, even though this was kind of off the shelf or done through the shadowy privatized network, that it had a direct link to the White House and to the U.S. government. And we named Oliver North and his assistant Rob Owen. It turns out we were right. The link was through the National Security Council, at least in this most recent episode. And so a number of the things that we alleged 3.5 years ago have since been proven true. Now, the important thing, though, today is that not only does our lawsuit, of course, have to go forward and further nail this stuff down in front of a jury, there are others who are corroborating what we said. Even Newsweek magazine last July, in an article about the Poindexter trial, they admitted that the so-called off-the-shelf operation that Ollie North spoke about. Remember during the hearings, during the Iran-Contra hearings, Ollie North said that then CIA Director Casey liked to go to the off-the-shelf operation. In other words, something that was privately funded, not self-funding, self-sustaining, not part of the official government mechanism. And North admitted that he was instructed to go to Richard Secord and people like him to get things done in this kind of privatized network. So the Christic Institute is not the only one saying that there is a shadowy network, generally of former intelligence agents and other former government people who are in effect carrying on a privatized foreign policy. But it isn't a privatized foreign policy because they work hand in glove with the government. It's really an extension of government policy. So we've taken that on, and even Newsweek said in its July 17th issue of this year that this off-the-shelf operation is probably the most sinister aspect of the Iran-Contra hearings. And the assumption was made by Congress that it began with Ollie North or with Casey and then quickly died when it was discovered. But they now admit that it was much more extensive than that, and that it hasn't died, that it's still going on. And that's exactly what the Christic Institute has been trying to get at, is this.
What's still going on?
The operation of a privatized network of people who are in effect carrying out foreign policy for the government, but they're doing it through the private sector so that they will have greater deniability. And that's very dangerous, because what it means in effect is that the system of checks and balances, the fundamental democratic premises of our country, are being bypassed.
Well, two things. One is that it seems to me that the cover-up is to protect government institutions. So the deniability that Schultz and the State Department had anything to do with it, and the kind of deniability that the CIA had anything to do with it. That's where I think the cover-up is. They blamed it on all these private groups, and they were willing to burn those operations. What they're protecting now are the institutions like the State Department and like the CIA.
No, there are two different things going on here. First of all, there is the existence of the enterprise, and we think it is much more extensive than simply Central America. It did not begin with Ollie North, and it didn't end with him. So that's one thing that one has to go into.
Talk about that.
And then the second thing is the cover-up. Like anything historical, it has phases to it and it comes and goes, but it began in earnest in the late 70s when Jimmy Carter was elected and started emphasizing human rights, and Stansfield Turner came in and cleaned out a number of covert operatives, fired over 600 people out of the operations division of the CIA. That's when it had to go off the shelf, so to speak. So it began in earnest, although it has roots back prior to that, in the late 70s, and it's still going on. It has not been exposed. They're perfectly willing to cough up individuals like Ollie North, who was working with these people, or Richard Secord pleads one felony count and gets 11 dismissed, doesn't even have a trial, so that the people he worked with will not be exposed. And you're right, the cover-up is trying to protect both government institutions and individuals, I think primarily individuals. But you will note that in Ollie North's trial and in any of the subsequent ones, the first thing they did was cut away any conspiracy charges. They simply dropped the conspiracy charges, because that, of course, will lead to the question, with whom did they conspire? And it's going to go on up the ladder.
So you're saying the shadow government began in response to Carter's policy?
Not exclusively, but that was, I would say, it took a quantitative leap forward at that point in the late 70s.
But these guys had a history of being involved in
of doing similar kinds of things
Vietnam
while they were officials in government.
How far back?
The principals
go?
like Theodore Shackley and Thomas Kleins and Richard Secord have a history that goes back 20 to 30 years. Shackley was he was the CIA station chief in Miami in the 60s when attempts were set up to assassinate Castro. And some of that brought in the use of private operatives, an off-the-shelf shooter team, an assassination team, basically. So it goes certainly back to the 60s. But Shackley himself was in government, as were these other characters, until about 1976, when in fact George Bush was the director of the CIA, and they felt the need at that point to set up private corporations and to have it become a standalone, self-financed capacity. Where do you think they would find the millions of dollars to finance something like that? Well, there are two main lucrative sources. One of them is the arms traffic, which of course is needed for some of their covert wars anyhow. But arms merchants tend to not take credit. They want cash on the barrelhead. And where do you get large amounts of unmarked cash on the barrelhead? There's no industry in the world like the drug industry for generating ready cash. So there's a symbiotic relationship between the drug traffic and the arms traffic as a source of funding for this enterprise. And it has not stopped with Ollie North having his, taking the spear in his chest, a very small spear, I might add, that he took in his chest. So,
talk about that connection between drugs and Iran-Contra.
Well, I think the easiest way to nail the Iran-Contra drug connection is to look at some of the truly startling statements in the Kerry report that foreign policy objectives were given priority over the drug connection. We know, for instance, that sometimes it was a matter of direct cash being transferred. Ramon Milian Rodriguez, the money launderer for the cartel, has testified to giving at least $10 million directly to Felix Rodriguez, the man who ran the resupply of the Contras and was in constant touch with then Vice President George Bush's office. So I think that connection has at least been made by others besides the Christic Institute. The problem is nobody is pursuing it. Do you know that when the Iran-Contra hearings were held, remember the two protesters who stood up in the back and unfurled a flag that said, "Ask about cocaine, ask them about the cocaine." Those two people got more jail time than all of the Iran-Contra criminals that were exposed. So, I think it's not too strong to say that there is an ongoing cover-up that is still happening. Now, other drug connections, there are places like the Bahamas, for instance, where George Bush, as vice president and as the drug czar, really that's what he was prior to Bennett, he had a special charge as vice president for drug interdiction. He was shown the computer printouts from the AWAC airplanes that showed the number of planes leaving and landing from one small island in the Bahamas. It was obvious that something major was going on there. They said the word was that the place had a record that looked like O'Hare Airport, in terms of the number of flights coming and going. Nothing, of course, was done about that. It was covered up. The Bahamas hired a PR agency, which, as a matter of fact, had as one of its senior partners, what's his name? The name won't come to me. Lee Atwater. Lee Atwater was a part of the PR firm that was hired to cover up or handle this Bahamian PR problem that they thought they had. He's, of course, now one of the people advising George Bush on his drug policies. So I think that the connections between the Contras and drugs are real, and there's even been a Senate finding that has backed that up. The Costa Rican government has indicted John Hull, one of the key players in the whole Iran-Contra connection and a key player in the Christic Institute lawsuit. John Hull had major land holdings in northern Costa Rica, a ranch where he had several landing strips. Those landing strips were being used to bring in arms for the Contras, and they were also being used as a transit point for drugs coming up from the Medellin cartel, from Colombia, into the United States. Not only did we say that, not only did the Kerry Committee verify that, but the Costa Rican government has now indicted John Hull for arms trafficking and drug trafficking. As a matter of fact, he's a fugitive from justice because he fled Costa Rica and is back in the United States, left there illegally. So, when you have connections like that that are not being pursued, as far as we know, by any Justice Department, by any grand juries, by any special prosecutor, by any congressional investigation, the Iran-Contra studiously avoided the drug question. In the hours and hours of hearings that they had, we got, maybe 5 minutes on the drug issue, where Orrin Hatch would lob softballs to somebody like Ollie North saying, now is there anything to this drug connection? And he'd say, absolutely not. I know. Meanwhile, of course, we now know that Ollie North himself, in his handwritten diary, some 2,200 plus pages of handwritten diary, we know now from the special prosecutor, 543 pages have drug references in them. So Ollie North knew very well that the people he was dealing with were, at least some of them, involved in the drug traffic and were funding their operations through a drug connection. Now that's, A, that's not being pursued, and B, it's not being reported. There is very little in the press about the official connections between drug traffickers and foreign policy. It's like it didn't happen. And the criminal prosecutions that are coming down on Poindexter and Hakeem and these various people are being swept away with minor admissions. Yes, Ollie North got a gratuity that he didn't deserve. He's already admitted that and found guilty of it. So when Secord pleads guilty to lying to Congress about that, that's no big deal. It's basically damage control. These folks are into damage control, admitting what the general public already knows, giving the appearance that something is being done about it, when in fact it's not. The Poindexter trial has already been gutted, the conspiracy charge dropped. I will be very surprised if there is a Poindexter trial at all, because he's probably going to use the same ploy now that Joe Fernandez did. National security documents are needed, presidential papers are needed. He won't get those, and so the judge will say, well, he can't have a fair trial. That's the most likely scenario. If they don't come to that, he will probably plead guilty to some minor charge and have the rest of the charges dismissed. So in either case, the loser is the American public. The one who really gets cheated in this whole process is the public, because we're being kept in ignorance. We're being told that secrecy is more important than democracy. And I think it's the exact opposite trend that we see now in Eastern Europe and other places. This damn chair that...
I mean, aren't you saying, what you're saying is that the whole government is corrupt? I mean, what does that mean for the future?
Yeah, I'm saying that the government is corrupt and always has been. It's not a particularly Republican phenomenon, by the way. It cuts through Democratic and Republican administrations. And it bodes ill for the future if we aren't at least battling the real corruption and trying to turn the tide on that. I mean, there will always be corruption. It's a question of whether or not it's a wave that is washing over us, or whether or not we are standing firm against the corruption and not being hoodwinked, not taking the head fake that something is being done about Iran-Contra, when in fact it isn't. Iran-Contra, it reminds me of a play where you have the first two acts. First we had the congressional hearings, and well, they didn't really do anything, but the final resolution is coming later. And then, of course, we have the special prosecutor, and he's going to prosecute criminally, and he'll get to the bottom of it. And so the third act is coming later. We never get the third act. We're to the point where we've got a two-act play, and there isn't going to be any third act unless the citizens demand that there be some closing on this, that there be some resolution to how power was exercised in our name. And unless we demand that, it's not going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't bode well for the future. The future is very grim in terms of any kind of constitutional democracy, because I would maintain that democracy functions primarily on an open flow of information, where governments are able to to rewrite history and able to curtail the flow of information, you have a move toward dictatorship. That's the modus operandi of dictatorships, and that's what I see us gradually sliding toward. Some would say not so gradual, that it's a veritable rush toward it. Ironically, at the same time that other governments are resigning and communist party domination is being undone, and we're getting a look behind the scenes at how corrupt some of them were. Unless we are willing to look into our own corruption and not take the national security head fake, then I think, yeah, we're in big trouble. Here behind me is Father Bill Teska, who's an Episcopal priest and has joined us recently to be a primary liaison with the religious community. One of the things that we do at the Institute is that we try to not just have hard-hitting legal actions in the court, and we have a kind of a winning track record there. We try very seriously to get the message out through civic organizations, through synagogues, through churches. And we feel that the religious community is one of our primary constituencies. Many of us are people who have dedicated our lives to this kind of work because of our religious commitment. So it's very important to us, and we not only take the connection between the struggle for justice and spirituality seriously, we try to lead others to do that. So we're delighted that Bill and others, of course, are pushing for a closer liaison with the churches. But would you like to go on a general tour of the place? Of
course.
Go ahead. Let's move on into the next office then, where some of the computers and all that you see around you are part of the apparatus that we use for public education. We have a mailing list of approximately 80,000 people, and we try to target specific audiences with the kind of information that they're able to manage and deal with. Now, you may as well shut it off, because the other people in this office on this floor are not here right now. As you come around the corner, you'll have a good look here at Father Bill Teska, who is our liaison with the religious community, both Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish.
And part-time mail clerk.
And does a little bit of everything like most people in this institution do. It's almost ironic. Sometimes we get hotshot lawyers wanting to volunteer to work for us, and we look at them and say, but can you type? Because people here have to be very flexible and do a lot of different jobs. Well, let's go on upstairs and take a look at the public education.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
outreach
Bill.
department. We're in an old two-story building that at one point was a shoemaker shop.
What kind of shop?
It was a shoemaker's shop downstairs with the family living quarters upstairs, and I noticed that in some general Seacoast literature, these offices have been referred to as Washington townhouses. Well, I don't think many people who look at this very tough part of Washington would consider these to be townhouses in a highly desirable neighborhood. We're in one of the toughest, poorest parts of the city. But this is the antechamber to Sarah Nelson's office, and turn it off for a second. I want to introduce you, but I don't hear your last name.
Laporte Grimes.
Laporte Grand. Okay, so it's a double
It's a
barrel
hyphenated name.
Laurel?
Laurel Laporte Grimes.
Laporte Grand. Okay, good. So as we move, yeah, I'm ready. As we move on into Sarah Nelson's office, this is Laurel Laporte Grand, who's an assistant to Sarah Nelson, our executive director. That's another thing. We try to be very non-sexist, of course, in our approach. Our chief executive officer is a woman, Sarah Nelson, who really was very instrumental in getting the Karen Silkwood case started, and therefore, along with it, the Christic Institute. Sarah isn't in today, but this is her office, and all of these offices were put together by our own people, and we did all the rehab work ourselves, most of the time with donated materials, and the place has been gradually built from a terrible slum to only a moderate slum. Let's see if anybody's in. Okay, well, people are out at lunch right now, but yeah, all of this paneling was donated, by the way, and then we put it in ourselves or with volunteer labor. So
Whose office is this?
this is who's in this one now?
Cynthia.
Cynthia doing public education. Yeah, the public education director is using this office. I'll now take you into a closet and through a hall that didn't exist before, but we basically punched a hole in the wall here to enter into the other building. We're now in a second building that constitutes a lot of our administrative and press office. Rob Ritchie is one of our press people here who's been busily keeping track of all the different articles that come out and does a lot of contact with radio stations for us and servicing of different reporters that come up.
What do you got there?
It's a press release that we sent out about a month ago, and right now we're in the process of reorganization, which may be clear, and so I just want to go through some piles of old stuff.
Great.
All right. And part of our development office is this former bedroom with Steve Deal, the director of the office, is busily working away in there. This is where a lot of the direct mail is generated and various donors' services are provided, people who write in for information.
Looks like you're doing a big mailing, huh?
Yep, that's right. Pre-Christmas mailing, almost everybody's been involved in it.
That's how you support this whole operation, just on direct mail mainly, huh?
Not entirely, but predominantly from individual contributors.
What percentage, roughly speaking?
Say two-thirds to three-quarters.
She says our new findings about the CIA.
Must be nickels and dimes all bound up.
Yeah.
It's a very broadly based grassroots network. I mean, that's one of the gratifying things about the Christic Institute. We have literally hundreds and thousands of small donors who really believe in what we're doing and want to be a part of it. There are a couple of other small offices back there, but let's go down into what used to be the kitchen, and in fact, it still is kind of a kitchen coffee room. And
Yeah.
3 days before we have this report.
Where do you live?
we're going to interrupt your lunch for just 1 second, if you don't mind. And Cynthia, whose office you went into earlier, is here, as well as a couple of, you can see that we use this basically as a conference room, but also for a general kitchen. Rick Emmerich is the director of the press office that you were just in a few moments ago. So,
Many articles lately, or what do you normally do in the press office?
Well, our overall purpose is to maintain a liaison with the media, the news media. Recently, we've not had as many articles directly on our suit as we have in the past because of the status on it and all that sort of thing. But we have kept up with some articles peripheral to what we're doing, and we've continued to provide information to different media sources on issues that we're involved in.
Bill, I mean, in some ways it must be sort of discouraging in that you've gotten stuff out, I mean, things have happened, and yet things haven't. Things are like still there. The shadow government is still there. The case is kind of in the suspended animation in appeal. How do you keep your spirits? I mean, all of you.
and the mainstream press is very hard to break into because basically they don't want to cover these issues. That's one of the questions that I get asked every place that I speak is why isn't this in the press? One has to go into, of course, who owns the press, who advertises in the press, what are considered their safe sources that won't get them into any trouble, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a complex question, and yes, it's depressing at times, but people like Rick keep plugging away. We get a lot of things into the alternative media. We make sure that what press does come out then gets to the right people. And the kind of edifying or buoying side of it is the large number of people in this country who know that they can't depend upon the mainstream press and who want to hear about this stuff and who do believe it when they hear about it and who do want to do something about it.
Go ahead. One campaign that we're really working on right now is, we call it Media Watch. It's a campaign to encourage people around the country to write letters to the editor, to do op-ed pieces, really to talk back to the news media, to say, why aren't you covering these things? We've encouraged them to write on issues surrounding our case, the Oliver North trial, the upcoming Poindexter trial, the Fernandez trial, which was dismissed, and we've felt a really good response to that. It's been very impressive.
Yeah. There are some empirical signs of, as I say, the large number of people who really do want to learn about this stuff. I think ultimately, though, your question as to what makes you confident that something will be done, you've asked a very profoundly philosophic question, and for me personally, it comes back to whether or not one believes that the truth has some kind of power, and that we who have very few resources and very few people can hook into that power. And it's a power that the normal institutions and power structures don't appreciate or don't understand or don't know how to deal with. And so I think part of the answer to your question is how one views the power of truthfulness and the power of sisterhood and brotherhood. And people here are outrageously optimistic about that. These small cubicles so that people could have some kind of private offices. Let me show you upstairs, for instance. The ceiling up here is rather low, but it's one way of maximizing the space. And Sheila Wolf is our main bookkeeper, administrator, and general factotum of all the buildings and everything else, all the material parts of it. So.
You must have one of the hardest jobs here.
Not really. I'm the director of administration, and that includes the reception area, the mail room, and accounting.
And everybody here works generally far more than the 40-hour week and gets paid a lot less than the normal salary. I sometimes tell people our wages are lousy, but the retirement benefits are out of this world. Anyhow, Sheila's the one who has to come up with the payroll every half a month, and it's not easy. It's been a real tough struggle on the finances.
Well, that's what I meant with that job of yours.
It's, yeah, we've had it's been tight for the past couple of months.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can.
Welcome to my queendom.
Yeah, this is. These offices were all put in by us, so maximizing the space and the unusually large room that we had downstairs.
Oh.
Yeah,
Watch your head.
Oh.
These rooms are made for normal people. They're not made for you giants.
One fella came in and cracked his head and almost knocked himself out.
On that.
Well, yeah.
On that lead?
Yeah.
You ought
If you
to
don't
pat it.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea.
idea.
Padded cells. That's what we need around here.
This is equivalent to one. This is like solitary.
Anyhow. Are you hiding in there, Marie?
I think she's on the line, Sarah.
Okay. She's online with Sarah. But anyhow, these are mainly the accounting offices, and mail, as you can see, is one of the top priority these days. So everybody, all available hands are working on it.
Looks like you're recycling letters, huh?
Yep, we get the changes in and then submit the changes, and then we'll send out our informational updates.
How long will it take to get a mail in?
An in-house one, we've been doing them in-house lately. and they tend to take a little longer than the mail house because it's fewer hands. But I'd say probably a few days to actually get it out. But they work on them all the time.
Yeah.
They're always putting together pieces and writing articles.
And Diane Miller, who's working on this now, generally does servicing of benefactors, people who have questions that they need to get answered, or sometimes she substitutes as the person at the front desk answering the telephone. Usually people fill 2 or 3 different roles around here. And I noticed that you're shooting, among other things, some of the posters. One of the ones that you might find interesting is this very poster on the very front wall, Karen Silkwood poster. That was really the case that got us our start. We filed the Karen Silkwood lawsuit in 1976 when we weren't even incorporated yet, but it was the team of people who gathered to investigate, to prosecute, to fund and do public education around the Karen Silkwood case, who then came back to Washington in 1980, and we got our incorporation, and our formal beginning was in 1980. But the team of people who gathered to put the Silkwood case together were really the people who founded the Christic Institute.
Yeah, talk about the founders.
Well, there were approximately 6 of us who are still here now, who were, in a sense, co-founders. I suppose the main ones would be Danny Sheehan, who was the chief counsel on the Karen Silkwood case and is still the head of our litigation department. His wife, Sarah Nelson, who is our executive director. Sarah does all kinds of things. She has always helped with the funding. She's always been very closely involved with public education efforts and with getting the word out through print and through film, and she was very instrumental in helping to get the Silkwood movie started, so that a movie that was seen by millions of people got the message out that we wanted to, at least part of the message that we wanted to get across. We always used to joke that they might have been able to kill Karen Silkwood, but they can't kill Meryl Streep. And so Meryl Streep was able to get into a lot of hearts and minds that Karen Silkwood's message didn't reach while she was alive. That's what we do, is try to parlay the information that we have, the lawsuits that we do, into substantive social change by doing grassroots organizing and public education around the issues that we deal with. So we rely a lot on the press, and as you can see, there's always a number of issues that we keep posted and that we clip from other papers and try to get out to appropriate people, particularly the drug issues that are going on now. There are a number of things happening around that. It's a hot issue with the general public, and it's intimately tied into the lawsuit that we're currently doing. So we feel that it may be an opening of a new door. A lot of people who are perfectly willing to have the wool pulled over their eyes with regard to foreign policy and with regard to the policy toward Nicaragua, many of them know that drugs are wrong, and they're not about to have that concern be shunted aside. So
Hi, Sarah. Sure.
the drug issue, tough as it is a new opportunity, I think, for people to take a look at how power is being exercised and what's really going on in our country.
His line's busy.
And what are the mechanisms
Hi.
whereby the public is still kept in the dark.
We can walk out this door and within half a
Yeah,
block
I just called her and your line's
find
busy. Sarah
someone
just
whose
called
life
her.
has been severely impacted by drugs.
Oh.
How does that make
Right.
you feel?
We've had murders right here on our front steps,
Christians,
literally.
can we help
Drug killings have taken place right out here on the
Yeah, my
sidewalk,
Tom's
just
calling.
right outside of our door. It makes me feel that there is an urgency to this. It makes me feel that it's outrageous that this present government
Schwartz,
claims to have a war
he's
on
on
drugs,
busy right now. Would
when
you
in
like to
fact
hold
it doesn't.
over,
It's a
or would
PR
you like-
campaign. It's an attempt to make the public think something's being done
Okay.
about drugs.
And your
Arresting
number?
street level vendors, the only thing that does is provide new slots for new vendors. They're not going after the real drug lords.
And your name is?
They're not going after the people
Thank you.
who have gotten their ticket punched to continue their drug trafficking because they've either helped with intelligence information, they've helped with State Department objectives, they've helped the Contras, etc. Noriega is kind of a classic example, but there are many, many examples like him of people who are known drug traffickers, and a whole variety of government agencies and government individuals have looked the other way because of foreign policy objectives or other funding of the Contras, other objectives in between. So what it makes me feel is that we've got a lot of work cut out for us, and that getting the truth of this matter out is not going to be easy. It's going to be a long struggle, but it's obviously a very urgent struggle. You know, when people are literally dying on your front doorstep, and when one witnesses, as some of us have, the detoxification of crack babies and so on, and realizing the incredible costs to society that are not being dealt with by the present so-called war on drugs, then we know that there's a real urgency that we've got to do everything that we possibly can to get on top of this situation. Because ultimately it's not just drugs, or it's not just a particular lawsuit that's at stake. What's at stake here, I think, is the survival of democracy as we know it. And that is, it's not just, for instance, the Central Americans who are being harmed by our present government policies. I think ultimately it's our lives that are in the balance. It's the people of the U.S. who are perhaps losing some of their most fundamental rights and their most cherished institutions.
Right.
Do you know where Ken
Tell me about this poster.
This poster is an interesting example of how a lot of things happen. A young woman approached us who said she didn't have any money, but she believed in what we were doing and she really wanted to help us. Her name is Ellie Simons. And we said, well, what do you do? Who are you? And she said, well, I'm an artist. So we said, wonderful, draw a poster, make a poster for us. So she made this poster, which has to do, of course, with unmasking the shadow government, and the rather artistic mask that she drew with the Washington power syndrome in the background and the military, has been quite a success and quite a winner. As you can see, we've gone from that poster over to a t-shirt now, which has the same mask on it, and that's being marketed. So the point is that people like artists, musicians, poets, writers, accountants, a whole variety of people, I think, are willing to help with this effort and need to use their own skills, need to be who they are and not try to do everything themselves. We have some lawyers. We have some very dedicated and talented lawyers. We can bring lawsuits, but we need all kinds of help from other people who can contribute other elements to the general enlightening of the public. And,
hello, Andy.
so I'm very glad that you asked about that poster, because I think it's a striking example of how people of different talents can make a political contribution.
Can we get a shot of just the outside of this
Sure.
neighborhood?
Sure.
Is Jamie up there?
See?
Hold on, Ted.
And this is known as the Shaw District. If it weren't such a cold day, you would find dozens of people usually just hanging out here, winos, different kinds of people. But the Christic Institute simply took over what was originally a shoemaker's shop with a bay window in the front. We haven't been able to, can't afford to replace the bay window, so we simply have a plywood board boarding it up. But this building and the one next to it, and we now have two others down the street, constitute the Christic Institute. And it's been called a Washington townhouse. That Secord's lawyer said that they wanted to shut us down, they wanted to seize our Washington townhouse offices. And some of us have to smile at that, because it's hardly what one would consider a townhouse. This has been one of the major drug trafficking areas in the city. The small street down here at the corner is a known pickup point for cocaine. It's been that way for years. It's not as though officials don't know who these people are or where they're coming from. We see it going on almost on a daily basis around here. This small street called Hanover Place is, as you can see, it's only about 2 blocks long, but it is like a supermarket for drug trafficking. And probably
a lot of abandoned buildings.
And probably the people who just disappeared around the corner when we first came out here were a part of that. There's a whole kind of Warren hutch of one-way streets and alleys back in behind here that people go into. But yes, a lot of abandoned buildings. This building right next to us, for instance, has been this way for at least 10 years. I don't know how long before that. So, and we're literally within sight of the nation's capital. We're right here on North Capitol Street. If you walk out into the street, this isn't a terribly clear day, but you know, there's the nation's capital, you know, hardly more than a stone's throw away from this incredible slum where our offices are and where major drug traffic goes on daily. So we have some problems that we haven't gotten totally on top of yet, but we're working on them. We're working on them, and little by little, we're gonna get on top of it. We're the kind of people who still believe in a lot of the great principles that this country was founded on, and we still believe in all of those things that we were taught as school children about personal rights and democracy and government of the people. You know, we're the kind of folks who still believe in that. So that's our area. That's our office.
What channel is that?
He's we're just shooting for a little film that this guy's making. We're part of the Christic Institute here. You're one of the guys I've seen you around here before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm one of the guys in what?
I've seen on the block. I mean, I know you're one of the regulars. I don't know your name, but I knew you were around.
Was this gonna be on TV channel or something?
Well, it might be. You never know
Channel
what
13 or
what
something?
parts. The cutting room floor usually gets most of it. But
Yeah.
what do you think of this neighborhood?
Well, I think of it.
Yeah,
It's a hard neighborhood to survive.
it is.
You know, it's a hard neighborhood to survive. Not because of drugs, you know, because of unemployment,
There you go.
housing conditions,
I hear you, brother.
hunger. You know, all these things compressed together can really put a man into a very, very hostile mental state of mind. You know what I mean? And it's not. Everybody looking at the #1 thing is drugs. Okay, don't get me wrong, drugs play a part. But those other things, hunger, no place to stay, you know, no job, you know.
You know what? A good friend of mine once said that trying to learn about the drug situation by concentrating on the drugs is like trying to learn about fox hunting by just watching the fox.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot more going on.
A whole lot more to that.
That's right.
Who do you think is behind the drugs? As you mean, as far as how they get into the country and distribute it amongst the poor population?
Yeah, who's behind that?
I can't say. I would say one thing as government has power to transport. I mean, they're giving they're giving all these aids to these countries, shipping rifles or food or whatever over to all these countries, and these countries are in return supposed to be shipping their trade back here. But amongst their trade, drugs are smuggled in too.
That's
you
right.
know?
It's going in the pockets of officials, the real profits. Yeah.
Your big officials, you know. They are.
I tell you what, I've been in this neighborhood for 10 years, and I've been investigating the drug situation, you know, in terms of the government and all that.
Yeah.
Ain't nobody from this neighborhood flying the drugs in from Central America.
No.
They're being brought by planes that are helping the Contras and people like that.
Right.
You know, and then we feel the effects of them. You guys feel the effects of them more than
I used
anybody.
to work in the House of Representatives, believe it or not. Okay, my brother, he's still there. He's been there 20-something years now.
Yeah.
I used to work in the Republican cloakroom. Okay, and I know a friend of mine told me that a congressman brought him a briefcase of heroin and asked him did he want to distribute it.
Yeah.
And he said no.
No, it happens. It happens.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And they try to blame it on the poor people who are the victims of the drugs.
They try to put it on us.
Which congressman was that?
I don't know his name. I don't know his name. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't get his name. You know,
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah,
What are your
okay.
names?
my name is Alan.
Alan?
Yeah. I'm Leola.
Okay. Well, at least you meet your neighbors, huh?
Good. Good to see you guys.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Y'all take care.
All right.
All right, let's get in before we freeze. There we go. You heading out? You know, who do you think is bringing the drugs in? He said, well, you know, they're coming in with all these government people seem to know about. It must be government people that are bringing it. I loved it. Anyhow.
They're friendly enough
can-
to talk to.
Well, they're not only friendly, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in this neighborhood. And,
Yes.
you know, one of their main points was, look, it's not just a drug problem, it's mainly a poverty problem. You know, people not having work, not having, you know,
Economic
anything else to
violence.
turn to. So it's that whole context of people who have very few choices in their lives are being told to just say no as though,
And
as
the
though they had
people that are
choices.
living it know it. You know, it's easy for us to sit and diagnose it.
I'd never talked to this guy before in my life, and yet he came out basically
He's
with
not
our
one of
line.
the people from around here.
He came right out with it. It was wonderful. Anyhow, all right.
Did a book it took me about 5 years, and it had to do with U.S. government recruitment.